We might just be the first people to stand on a stage facing 10 years in a South African jail.
It didn't used to be like that. We had careers in the South African television and film industry. We traveled Southern Africa making documentaries, shooting movies, sitcoms, reality TV. We had a busy and fruitful life.
Last week, we had the 5-year anniversary of a night we will never forget. It had been a long day on a film shoot. We were fast asleep, warm and snug. It was 2 a.m. when all of a sudden our Jack Russell levitated off of the bed. We heard voices outside, we heard footsteps, we thought we were being robbed. And then all of a sudden there was an extremely loud banging at the kitchen door.
By the time I got to the kitchen door in what amounted to be my underwear, the door was moving in the frame. There was some angry people around. I opened the door, and there's 6 gun barrels pointing at me, and the police are going, "Have you got illegal drugs in this house?" I said, "Yes, we have cannabis in the house." And I actually opened the security gate because they were about to shoot the locks off.
What followed was a 5-hour ordeal in our home. They strip-searched me 3 times. They separated us out. They wouldn't allow us to put warm clothes on.
And all the time, they were just screaming about a drug lab.
Where's the drug lab? Where's the drug lab? Where's the drug lab? Over and over again.
They wouldn't let me wear my glasses. It was freezing cold. I had a gun in my cheek for about 2 hours, and I could see out the kitchen window. They've made mincemeat of our security gates. They've gained access to the property. There's no warrant. They're walking around my home. Where are my rights?
So then eventually it got light, and they marched us around our property, shouting still, "Where's the drug lab?" And then it became really obvious that there was no drug lab. So then they hauled us off to the police cells, and I will never forget that sound of that huge big metal gate clanging shut, and us being locked in there with this huge big key.
You know, we consider ourselves lucky that it was a Wednesday morning, and we still shudder to think now what could have possibly happened to us if it had been a prime-time Saturday night and they'd thrown us in there. We were alone in each cell. We were kind of back to back, and we sang to each other to keep the levels of fear down. And the only other thing that I had in my cell was this really stinking pile of blankets in the corner. And I remember thinking, do I really have to put these things around me tonight to stay warm?
No human being should be subjected to a South African police holding cell. There's a hole in the corner for a toilet, and the stench takes months to get out of your nose.
By the end of the day, we were charged with possession of cannabis, and we were released on 1,000 rands bail from the state. And we stand before you here today on that same 1,000 rands bail from the state.
Same 1,000 rands bail. You know, we thought we were free, but in an instant, we realized that we are not. It could happen to you. You think you're free, but in an instant, you can find out that you're not.
Do you remember ringing the bail lawyer?
So we wanted to know what was going on, so we rang the bail lawyer.
You know, and that bail lawyer was 6,000 rand with no receipt.
And so he said to us, well, we are going to get a social worker to come and testify in court as to why you shouldn't go to jail. So I said, jail?
Jail?
And he said, yes, you are facing 7 to 10 years in jail.
Phew, you can't believe the blood just drained from our face. This is just cannabis. We didn't realize how serious this was. 7 to 10 years, you've got to be kidding me.
So then we mulled it over and we realized that we were faced with 3 potentially life-changing choices. Our first choice was to admit guilt. Okay, we're guilty. We'll take our punishment. We'll take the criminal record that goes with that. But goodness only knows what that would have done to our job and travel prospects.
Second choice. Being South Africa, we could have paid a bribe. And you know what? That was a really easy thing to sort out. It would have cost us 80,000 rand to have the dockets disappear. 10 years, 80 grand. 10 years, 80 grand. We considered it. We even nearly paid it. And then we thought, they're going to be back. And we would just be perpetuating this evil system that we are now embroiled in.
Our third choice was to actually challenge this irrational law. Because the more we thought about it, the more we realized that this was a gross invasion of our privacy. It actually boiled down to a human rights issue. This is about sovereignty. It's about cognitive liberty. It's about the very freedom of our minds.
So what we did, we started to write a 44-page affidavit. And we claimed our human rights to use the cannabis plant in the privacy of our own home. We sued 7 government departments to answer to our charges of them enacting an unlawful law. We got a very wise man with what amounted to be a really expensive signature to sign it off, and we handed it in to the Pretoria High Court. We were successful. We got a stay of prosecution, pending the outcome of what has amounted to this enormous constitutional challenge we've embarked on. We have set a precedent in South African law.
So then the dust settled, life goes on, and we're driving to work the one day, and we see on this lamppost this poster, and it says, "Couple fight for Dagga." So we go, oh, look at that.
Well,
oh,
get
that's
off that
my
joint. No, man,
that's
that's my
joint.
joint.
No, that's my joint.
No, couple fighting for Dagga.
So we get to the studio, and a friend of mine phones, and he says, "Oh, you're on the front page of the newspaper."
Oh.
And we realized that that was us. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we became the Dagga Couple, the reluctant activists.
Yeah. The reluctant activists indeed. The man with the expensive signature told us 2 very important pieces of information. He said, do not be in a hurry to do this. This is enormous. For you to win, you have to have the majority of South Africans behind you to do this. And what you're going to have to do is form some sort of umbrella organization to collate all the information that's going to come hitting at you, because this is complex stuff. So, with the blessing of the Law Society of South Africa, we germinated South Africa's very first cannabis non-profit company, Fields of Green for All. And we started educating people about their rights. And we started collating the masses of evidence that we require to fight this battle and to basically coordinate all of these fundraising attempts to keep this show on the road.
And then as Fields of Green for All grew, so did our inbox. And these stories came in, and it became really evident that the harms of prohibition far outweigh the perceived harms of this plant. Our inbox was an outline of the agony of the system.
We nicknamed it Dear Dagga Couple.
Yeah. You know, it's amazing how many people use Dagga as leverage in divorce cases, in child custody battles.
And the stigma of workplace drug testing, and the stigma of people losing their jobs just because they have a relationship with a plant. The list goes on.
And of course, bust after bust after bust. And it became really, really evident that South Africans just don't know their rights. You know, if you use this plant and you know your rights and you get arrested, it'll be a far less traumatic experience. You know what? Call it what you want. Dagga, cannabis, marijuana, pot, weed, hemp, guggelgras. We knew that we had the most incredible amount of research to get through.
I spent many hours in the State Library in Pretoria trying to figure out how this system started. And to my disgust, I found the very first law prohibiting the use of cannabis anywhere in the world was enacted just up the road in Natal in 1870. British colonials banned their Hindu slaves from using their sacrament because it made them unfit for the duties for which they were brought to the colony in the first place. By 1890, it was banned right here in Cape Town, in what was the Cape Colony. But it wasn't Hindus this time, it was the Malays, because it made them indolent and prone to housebreaking. By 1925, on the strength of one letter from the South African government, the League of Nations banned cannabis worldwide. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't just started here, it was perpetuated here. Everyone, or most of you will remember the battle cries of Richard Nixon in the early 70s, all out war on drugs. Well, in 1971, the Rehabilitation Act was passed in South Africa, and in the first year, 70,000 black men were arrested on Dagga charges. We are challenging the 1992 Drugs and Drug Trafficking Act, which says cannabis is a dangerous, dependence-producing substance with no medical application whatsoever. So you can see, there's absolutely no scientific basis for any of this. This is all about population control, and this is the last apartheid law.
We've seen it, we've smelt it. The system is out of control. It's outdated, it's based on fear, and it makes criminals of ordinary people like us. You know, our work has only just begun as we prepare for the trial of the plant to be held in the Pretoria High Court in March 2016. We are the plaintiffs, and the government are the defendants. And we intend to take this challenge all the way to the International Court of Human Rights, so that this plant never has to be put on trial ever anywhere in the world.
The relief we seek from the courts is the legalized regulation of the cannabis plant for responsible adult use. Now, don't get scared about this legalization word, because many of you have this vision of it being a free-for-all. Well, we would suggest to you that right now it is a free-for-all, because nobody's looking for an ID card out there. The system that was put in place to prohibit and control is completely out of control. We need to regulate this plant. We suggest we bring it into the marketplace, just like we do with other legal intoxicants. We need to legitimize the extensive underground market in cannabis. It is worth billions. We think the irony is the only way you are going to control this plant is to set it free. Luckily for us, there are legalization models starting all over the world, and we can look to them for guidance. It's early days yet, but we can tell you right now, the sky hasn't fallen in.
So how about it, South Africa? What are we waiting for? What are we waiting for? This is the most researched plant on the planet. We know about the health benefits. We know about the thousands of industrial applications. We know about the economic potential. So stop arresting us.
And as for our constitution,
South Africa has a vibrant young constitution, and we have already dealt with such significant issues as the death penalty, abortion, gay rights, and we've dealt with these issues in a modern and forward-thinking way.
we have an online re-legalization petition. It's been there for a number of years. And what we can tell you is Cape Town has more signatories on it than any other city in the country. True story. What else we can tell you is, if there are 1,000 people in this room, we estimate 600 of you have either used, did use, do use, or condone the use of this plant. So we would suggest to you that that is completely normal behavior.
So what's the next step? You see, there's one thing that is holding us back. And this is the common perception that the cannabis user is a lazy, low-frequency, low-life loser. And this is what we need to change. We need to change this common perception.
You know, when we do our street parties in Johannesburg and there are 4,500 people in front of us on the stage, Or we join the Global Cannabis March right here in Cape Town. 10,000 of us walked straight past this building this year. We don't see that guy here. We don't see any losers. What we see is a complete cross-section of South African citizens, young and old. Every single socio-economic background and every single color of our rainbow. So where do they fit in?
What about the executive who uses cannabis to relax at the end of her busy and stressful day? Where does she fit in? What about the policeman who came up to us after a presentation in Port Elizabeth and he said, you know, if I don't use this plant to relax at the end of the day, I just shoot somebody. So strung out.
True, oh, he did. And what about the cancer sufferer who uses cannabis to get over the horrendous side effects of chemotherapy? Where would she fit in? Or the farmer who's just had all of his food crops poisoned by a police helicopter in some vain attempt to eradicate Dagga in the valley. Where does he fit in? Where do we fit in? And that, for that matter, ladies and gentlemen, where do all you guys fit in? Because we don't see any losers here anyway. Look, where are they all?
We need you to be open and honest about your use of this plant. And we're inviting you to come out of the cannabis closet so that we can bust this common perception.
We're not asking you to put a Dagga leaf tattoo on your arm. We're not asking you to stand on a public stage like this and tell the whole world you use cannabis. And we're certainly not suggesting that you start a multi-million rand constitutional challenge. But what we want you to do is help us to normalize this plant and stick up for this plant in your conversations, in your hood, and in your circle of friends.
You know, send a signal to the lawmakers that it is not political suicide to change this cruel system. Together with our amazing, amazing legal team and activists across the country, we're working really hard to bring you the definitive trial of the plant next year. We've created the legal will. So now everybody out there who uses this plant needs to create the political will, and then together we win. This is the last apartheid law, South Africa. Cannabis prohibition started here. Let's get rid of the stigma and end it here. Thank you.
Well done.